Today we're talking about Rangda Mask. As you may or may not know, Rangda Mask was glitched in previous patches. The moment you died, your stacks basically became worthless and you lost the passive effect. In the most recent patch, this has been fixed and Rangda Mask is now actually usable. As such, I think it's worth taking another look at the item and consider who can make good use of it, for whom it's not that beneficial and who's somewhat in between. As we had our first SPL games today, we can actually address that right away. Rangda Mask was picked up by Yaman on Poseidon, which did not go all too well. Energy lost the game and Yaman never really got to 6 stacks, so eventually ended up selling the item despite of starting with it, so there would have been a high chance of him actually finishing the stacks. And that's already the main issue with Rangdas. You need to have those stacks in order for the item to be effective. While this is pretty obvious, it's not that obvious what that implies to many. Some people think you will always end up with the 6 stacks, or you will end up with them eventually, but you have to understand that it's important to end up with these stacks early enough to really have enough value out of the item, because late game you're eventually gonna end up selling it anyways, because it's not the best late game item at full stacks anymore. So there's a very limited time frame where you can make use out of it. I am still not so convinced as to picking it up on midlaners. We'll have to see that more, but at the moment I think Bamba's Mask is just a little more impactful due to the fact that it allows you to clear mid camps on your own, and from what we're seeing in the SPL, most midlaners are picking up Bambas or are going straight into some other item that is, well, situational, but none of them really picked up Rangdas outside of Yaman in that one game. If we see more of it, it will probably be on midlaners that have the potential to get these stacks relatively safely and aggress relatively reliably in order for them to be worth investing into it and making use of that potential. This should probably also be guards who maybe either have really good camp clear so they don't need to care about Bambas, or do not consider clearing camps early on. I think almost all mid lane mages can make use out of cooldown reduction to some extent, so for them it's not really worth going over who makes good use of it as far as I'm concerned, simply because there's no mage where you can really go wrong with cooldown reduction. At the same time, movement speed is not the greatest stat for most of them. If you get to the 16 stacks and get the penetration, it's great, but that's gonna be very late into the game and the penetration is usually not worth that much then anymore, unless you snowball so hard that you get it earlier. Who I think is worth talking about more are assassins. Now, we actually haven't seen it on assassins in SPL yet, and I'm not so sure if that will happen because SPL is a bit of a different climate, so to speak. But I think at least for casuals and ranked, Rangda Mask will have a niche. And in that regard, I would like to address which guards can make good use of it as compared to which can't. Two assassins that are not really assassins but rather mages are Ao Kwang and Morrigan. I will still include them here simply because they kinda play as junglers and as assassins. For those two, I think the item is great. Both benefit decently from extra mobility, especially Morrigan because her escape is not the greatest, and both make very good use of cooldown reduction. Now, they both make great use of penetration as well, but once again, I wouldn't make that the important point here, simply because the penetration is something that comes too late for it to be a key factor for the item. I think getting 6 stacks with Ao Kwang is very much possible to be achieved, and if you don't do it, then you're basically not making good use of Ao Kwang in general. Due to his execute, he should always be able to get those relatively reliably. With Morrigan, it's a little harder, but she will still get stacks if she kills someone while transformed, so even if she has the item only on herself and that person doesn't have it, she will still get stacks for Rangdas, which makes it very much possible to stack it, and those characters really benefit from CDR. Morrigan even more than Ao Kwang, but both really make great use of that. So I would say, because of the mix of stats, it really offers a lot for them, and I would recommend building it in general. Another character who I'd like to place in a similar place to them is Loki. Now, Loki is not a typical jungler, generally not considered a jungler, but with the recent item changes, with stuff like Heartseeker and all those other changes that are coming in, he has more viability in the jungle than in the previous seasons. As such, I will just point out here that if you play him jungle, Rangda Mask is excellent for him. With Loki, you're pretty much guaranteed to get some sneaky kills that will allow you to get those stacks. He makes great use of all the effects on the item, and as such, very much like Morrigan, is one of the prime characters for this item in my opinion. Another one is Thanatos. For Thanatos, it's not so much that he needs the CDR that desperately, it's more that he has such an easy time getting the stacks early on, and the overall stats are nice. With Thanatos, I wouldn't say you should always build it, but it can be very good depending on the situation. For Thanatos, it's more the deal that there are many other options that are just as equally appealing early in the game, which don't really force him into Rangda's Mask. Another god who is somewhat close to Thanatos in viability of this item is Awilish. With Awilish, the case is that you are able to get a lot of kills early in the game, and CDR is something that's very strong due to the cooldown of a Feather Step being lowered that way. But there are also many other items that she can make great use of. She's one of the gods who can pretty much make use of every new or changed item this season, so she doesn't have to get it. But if you're snowballing a little bit or you feel like you're gonna have some early snowball potential, then I wouldn't be against Rangda's Mask. In all these cases, I would say build it after boots, so you have some base mobility, some base damage, something reliable to fall back on, and then go into Rangda's. Now we have 4 characters that are more debatable. There's Fenrir, who doesn't really need pen that much because his base values are already pretty good, and he will often be able to kill people that way. He doesn't need power that much because he has power in his 2 if you want that desperately. And overall, his kit is often used more in a setup way, and for that, CDR can be great, and early CDR for him really helps. The movement speed also really helps. As such, I think he can make good use of Rangda's Mask, but then again, delaying the build is not always ideal for him. The same thing goes for Serket. Serket would make great use of this item if it wasn't for the fact that she has so many other items she wants to build into. Serket is very strong early on at the moment, so she has a very easy time snowballing and getting the stacks. As such, I would kinda tend towards getting it if you think you have some potential for that. But at the same time, if that doesn't happen, she doesn't benefit all too much from just the CDR on the item, different from some other gods that I mentioned before. And once again, she just wants other items done as quick as possible. She wants to have a pen as quick as possible, and maybe crit later on, and bigger numbers of CDR if possible. Then there are Susano and Naja. Now with those two, I am very uncertain. Susano, I think, has so many great options at the moment that I don't think he will need Rangda's Mask, especially if you have items like Heartseeker and Hydras, which are both really strong for him. There's rarely the need to spend another 500 on Rangda's in between, but at the same time, it can be done, and he has a lot of potential to snowball early with the bluestone damage. His damage is generally a bit out of control, and his kill potential is too. With Naja, similar situation. CDR is really good for him, but does he really make the most use out of Rangda's? Because if you fall behind, you're gonna have a problem with Naja anyways, and if you fall behind with Rangda's, that problem is even more amplified. Naja is a character that excels from ahead, and if you are ahead and you're able to maintain that with Rangda's, then yes, go for it. But if you feel like you're having a bit of a rough start, I would totally recommend against it. 2 question marks that are more towards the spectrum where I'd say I'd rather not build it are Ratatoskr and Thor. Very similar scenarios here. They have good earlies, but not the best earlies, and they usually just build other items that are better for them. Once again, Heartseeker being a prime example here, that just work very well, and the CDR is not as important for them at that point of the game, and usually plays a bigger role later when they are more setup oriented, if you want to build them like that. The gods who are not recommended on for different reasons are the ones that are coming now. Hunbat, because he doesn't have that early kill potential. The CDR would be really nice for him, he really benefits from that, but with Hunbat you're just gonna farm a little bit until you come online, and Rangda's is just gonna hinder you at doing that. Arachne would have the early kill potential, but she doesn't make enough use of movement speed and CDR. She really needs neither of those all too much. Movement speed is still nice, but CDR especially something that she doesn't really benefit from, and other items that are simply better. Bakasura and Kali both really are more of a hyper carry focused characters, so they both don't really need CDR at all, and I wouldn't recommend it. Bastet does like CDR, but her early kill potential isn't that great, and by the time it comes online, it's probably a little too late to get Rangda's, and then late game, once again, you're not making too much use out of it, so really there's too much of a gap where you can't get the item yet, or it's too late to get it, so the room for it to be useful is just too little. Camazot's a similar thing to maybe Thor or Tusker here. Really better items for him there. He doesn't make too much use of CDR, and he doesn't really need the stats on the item in general. Mercury falls under the same hyper carry category, doesn't really need CDR. And the same goes for Nemesis. She would make good use of CDR, but she just wants to get her build as a whole online. And Rangda has very little room in there, in my opinion. I'm not saying you will never see the item on these characters, but as the CDR comes first before the penetration, I think the ones that I mentioned first make most use of it. With that, thank you guys for watching. Let me know in the comments if you think I missed out on a specific god that could make good use of this item, or you maybe disagree with one of the ones I mentioned. Hope to see you for the next video tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.